I'm Dr. Verna Gibbs, and this purpose of this training video is to demonstrate the way in which we want the sponges and the counting management practices performed in the operating room. This is an adjunct to the lecture series that hopefully you've already looked at, and what we're going to do is go over some of the essential elements that really will help make this practice very easy for you in the operating room. Now, as we discussed earlier, you need three elements: the structure, process, and outcome. And I'm going to show you the structural elements, and then we're going to demonstrate some aspects of the actual practice. The first thing that we need is the setup of how you're going to have something that's safe and easy to use to hold the sponge in the sponge holders. So the essential components are first is the rack. This is a rack. They come in various sizes and configurations, but for the purposes of this is a sponge rack that your institution may have purchased. In addition, the racks come as singles so that there's only these two holders here on this rack, as well as other ones that this is a double version. Now this rack is designed to hold the box, and this box has the sponge holders inside of it, and the box fits very nicely inside the rack. The rack and the box of holders is attached to an IV pole. And what I want to show you here that's very important is that the pole has to have two prongs. This is what we call a two-prong IV pole. And the rack should be securely attached. There's various ways. This is particularly here, has a clamp, but there are other ones that have screw knobs. And there's another version that has two hooks that come over the top like this. If you have that kind of rack with the two hooks coming over the top, those two hooks coming over the top have to go over the top of the IV pole, because that will provide strong stability so when the rack is on the pole it won't wobble. The other important thing is that the rack has to be mounted on the IV pole so that the assembly can be adjusted. So for those people that are tall or short, the assembly can easily be changed. The wrong type of pole to use is this four-prong, 1, 2, 3, 4, four-prong IV pole. And the reason that this won't work for you is that there is the way that you take the holders out of the boxes, they come off of the top. But if you can see, if your box of holders is mounted on this kind of four-prong IV pole, you won't be able to get the holders out of the box. So a four-prong IV pole is the wrong type to purchase. And what we want you to get, I'm reiterating because we've gone to a number of different facilities and we have found the four-prong type, and nurses are very dissatisfied with that. You got to get the two-prong type so that you can easily remove the holders, and then they are put on the prongs here of the rack, and this whole assembly can easily be adjusted for different heights of people using it. So that's one structural element: the rack, the holders, the box, and the sign. The sign is important. Number one, signs have to be laminated, and they're specifically designed, as they come off the PDF files that you've received, to cover the boxes, because the manufacturers have put different instructions on the boxes. And we use this sign to cover that so there's no confusion in the operating room when we're using these. And also it sends a very strong visual signal that all of the sponges, the used and unused sponges are here. And we want all of the sponges here. So this rack sign, the other important signs are the safety rules sign, which should be mounted in every operating room. This too should be laminated, no Scotch tape around the edges, so it's a washable surface. And this here, which we call the incorrect count or the yield or the reconcile, but this is the incorrect count sign or the incorrect count checklist. And these three signs, the incorrect count checklist, the safety rules, and the rack sign, are structural components which are essential to this practice. Now we're going to go over some of the essentials of the sponge management practice. In most operating rooms, the sponges will come off of the field into ring stands or into kick buckets. And what we want to make sure is that your kick buckets are lined with not red biohazard bags, but with clear bags. Because in red biohazard bags, you won't be able to see a bloody sponge. So if the sponges are used or unused, if you have them in clear plastic bags, they'll be very easy for you to see. Get them out of the kick buckets so that they can go in our holders. So we're going to load these used sponges into the sponge holders. What I want to emphasize is that it doesn't really matter who makes the holders, but they must be blue backed and not clear. So interestingly enough, it's clear bags in the kick buckets, but it's blue backed sponge holders. And these instructions and the type of sponge holder doesn't matter. It's that it's blue backed and it has 10 individual pockets. Now, all of the holders have the ability to pop this little center divider, which some of you may have been doing in your other practice. But in this practice, we don't want you to pop the center divider. We want them to be left as individual pockets. Okay, so we're going to show you how to put the sponges in the holders. If the sponges are coming off of the field, they'll be in kick buckets or in these ring stands. But the important point is we don't want you to let the sponges mount up in the kick buckets and in the ring stands. We want you to move them out and get them into the holders throughout the operation. The first thing you want to do is we make sure we separate the sponges, open them up so we know that we have only one. Then I make an oval, but you want to make sure that the blue radio-opaque marker is facing forward. And this goes in the first pocket in the bottom of the holder. So we want to separate the sponge, make sure that we have only one. Blue marker faces forward. The blue marker faces forward because that's one of the ways we can tell that this is a surgical sponge and not a dressing sponge. That's less important when we're doing the lap pads, but it's very important when we're working with the Raytec, because the Raytec 4x4 can be mistaken for a dressing sponge. So as you can see, I'm loading from the bottom horizontally up towards the top. And each of the sponges should be opened and separated to make sure that you have only one sponge. As you know, that you can have multiple types of sponges in a kick bucket, and you want to make sure that they're separate. Now in this demonstration here, I'm using tomato juice and some red food coloring. And the reason that when you're doing your own demonstrations, we want you to use that is because it mimics the blood very well, forms little clots. And it's important when the nurses are learning that they have a sense of respect for the sponges. And if you just use saline, there's a tendency to fling things around, which you wouldn't do in a normal operating room situation. And truth be told, you wouldn't be talking without a surgical mask, but for purposes of this, you want to make sure you have eye protection and the right kind of mask when you're actually doing this in the real operating room. So this now demonstrates that we have 10 pockets, each with one sponge per pocket. And the important point I want you to notice is that the tags are all within the pocket and they're not dangling out. And this, you might see, which is wrong, are dangling tags. And the reason that you don't want to do that is if the sponges are very bloody, these tags will wick the blood and they'll dangle and drip blood on the floor. So you want to make sure the correct way is to put the tags inside the pocket of each holder. And these are lap pads, as you've seen, and they fit very nicely in the individual pockets, and there's no need to pop the center dividers. Now I'm going to show you the wrong way that the holders could be loaded. The first wrong way is, even though we said to start at the bottom, first bottom pocket, but then to load vertically. So we want you to load from the bottom to the top, but we want you to load horizontally on the bottom. And if you see this, this has followed the dictum that it's bottoms up, but it's bottoms up vertically. And then what would happen here is that this would continue to be loaded down. And the problem with this is then at the end of the case, if you had a missing sponge, the bottom pocket would be down here. And that's difficult for the person who's in the scrub to look and to see. So this is loading bottoms up vertically, and that's wrong. Okay, another wrong scenario is to begin to load the pockets from the top. And you'll see this very frequently sometimes because this is kind of a natural instinct to go for the top pockets. But this is loading top down. They're horizontal because they're loading from side to side, or I'm loading from side to side, but this is top down, and this is wrong also. The third wrong way is to start at the top, and if you're loading top down, but this is top down vertically. And the similar problem will be that you'll end up with the sponges, even if you end up top down and go back up the other side, you could end up here, but you won't be able to see the bottommost pocket will be that which will be the hardest for the scrub tech to see. So these are the wrong ways to load the holders. Now I'm going to show you how to load the Raytech sponges, which are very commonly used. And the important point here is as they come out of the bucket, you want to make sure that you can always see the radio opaque marker. And similarly, we load from the bottom to the top. So the Raytech, make sure you only have one. And we load from the bottom horizontally across the bottom to the top. And the thing about Raytech that I'm sure many of you know is how they frequently stick together. So you want to make sure that they're opened up so that we truly only have one Raytech at a time. And not only do we want to make sure that there are two separate Raytech, you also want to make sure that when you have sponges of different type in one disposal receptacle, that you even look in the laps, because the laps can sometimes be mixed up with a Raytech. So the point here is to make sure that you only have one sponge, because at the end, if you have 10 Raytech to begin the case, you want to make sure that you have one sponge in each pocket. And if you have an empty pocket, you might have to go back and look within the individual pockets, because you might have two which are stuck together. Each of these, you can see the Raytech marker is facing forward. That's important to distinguish it from a dressing sponge, which is the exact same size. And if you mount it this way, or if it's mixed up, you may not be able to tell that. So it's very important when you're taking sponges out of the buckets that you make sure that they have a radio opaque marker, and you load the marker facing forward, because that tells you that this is a radio opaque sponge and not a dressing sponge. Each operating room has to have a wall-mounted dry erase board. And I'm going to show you the way in which the surgical sponge counts should be recorded on the board. Now, dry erase boards should contain the information not only for the sponge counts, but also for needles. But in this small board here, I'm just going to demonstrate how the sponge counts should be recorded. The Raytech come in units of 10, and so This is called a superscript running total format. It's been primarily used with needles for a very long time, but we're applying this also to the way to record the counting for sponges. So Raytecher 10, if you add 10 to the field, it's a superscript 10, and then the total 20, and then 10, and say if you had 30. The last number of the running should be the total number of sponges that are out. So if we have, in this instance, 30 Raytech, we would expect to see 3 holders full of Raytech sponges. And similarly for the laps, they are managed in multiples of 10. So even though the laps come in packs of 5, you will always use multiples of 10. So even though they're in packs of 5, we don't write 5 plus 5. We just start with the total numbers, which would be 10. And if we add another package, 10, which would be a total of 20. So the way in which the counts are managed is in multiples of 10, and it's a running total superscript format. Now, what we don't want you to do is to use additional notations on the board. This is supposed to be clear and not confused. So if you have 10, we don't want you to use plus signs and equal signs, and we don't want initials and no crossouts and no other signage that you may traditionally have been using. So the intent here is to have a standardized, universal means that everybody uses and everybody understands as the way in which we record the counts on the board. Now, most hospitals use a running horizontal total format, but it may be possible in your hospital that you've chosen a vertical format, and I just want to demonstrate what that looks like. So in this instance, you keep track of the counts in a vertical format, very much like what you would use if you were adding up a column of numbers. So we manage laps in groups of 10, and if you added another package of laps, then it's a running total. And it's not a superscript format in this instance, but we have a summation line. And for Raytech, similarly, if we added another package of Raytech, we would have the last number would be the total number of sponges that are out. So in this instance, when we looked at our holders, we would expect to see 4 holders full of lap pads and 2 holders full of Raytech. We want to demonstrate now the practices for the in counts. So the circulating nurse would take the package of sponges and drop them to the scrub, and we would say that they want to count in 10. So pick up the package and show, and then put it down and show me. Yeah. Okay. So in this instance, she's demonstrating that, well, it must be right, there are 10 because the band hasn't been broken. But having an unbroken band is not correct. Okay, now do fanning. The other way that we would see them often done is this. 1, 2, 3. This is called fanning, and that's not correct either. The correct way we want you to always count in the sponges is to break the band and then separate the sponges as they're being put down on the field. And the scrub and the circ will count them together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So see, we're looking together. She separates the sponges and saying the count aloud. Okay, now for laps, we would do the same thing. And here's a pack of laps that we've already opened. So you want to start those. And here's another pack of laps. How we would count these in. And you should say it with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead. We have to count in units of 10. 6, 7, 8, 9. Count that again. 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So yes, you can have the wrong number of sponges coming directly out of manufacturing packages. And the correct practice is to remove the sponges from the OR. And so, correct practice is to get a plastic bag or other type of receptacle, put them in the bag, and remove them from the OR. Now, for laps, we would do the same thing, and here's a pack of laps that we've already opened, so you want to start those, and here's another pack of laps, how we would count these in. And you should say it with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead. We have to count in units of 10. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 laps, 10 Raytech. We always work in multiples of 10. Some of you may be using surgical towels during your operations. I just wanted to show, this is a standard surgical drape towel. This is blue. It's usually made of a little bit coarser type of cotton. And these should be used only for drapes. But you may find that there are some of your surgeons that want to use towels intracorporeally. And if those are types of opportunities in your facility, what we want you to buy are these white radio-opaque towels. They're white, they're made of a finer grade cotton, and while you can't see it, running along the edge of this towel is a radio-opaque thread. So this will be able to be seen on X-ray. These usually come in packs of 4 or 6. So if your hospital is using these, if your facility or you have surgeons that want to use a towel intracorporeally, you need to purchase these radio-opaque towels. And when you add them to the field, they come in packs of 4 or 6. So you would add those, they would be counted in, and you would write on your dry erase board towels, and let's say this was in a pack of 4. They're not put in the sponge holders, and they're not counted in multiples of 10. They're used in the unit of issue. But these white radio-opaque towels are very similar to the white laps, white Raytech. So if it's white and has a radio-opaque marker, it's safe to go in the patient. Don't put these in patients, and you don't have to count these. We've demonstrated the in count. I want to reference here the safety rules poster. At the in count, we check the sponges, and at the closing count, that's the time when there's a pause for the gauze, which is when the surgeon does the methodical wound exam. And at the final count, we say the show me step. Now you'll notice that we don't call the counts the first count, second count, or third count. We want you to use names. And we've actually integrated the electronic medical record to help reinforce this best practice. So not first count, second count, third count. It's the in count, closing count, and final count. Now during the operation, you can call for a count at any time. And as an example of a best practice in using the sponge holders when they are full, so in this instance we have 10 laps, but if I needed to add more laps to this, what you might want to do is to have your scrub and circ communicate with each other. So the circulating nurse shows the scrub, look, we've got 10, there's no empty pockets, before you put the next holder on top. Now, you could count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But I think you'll find that if there are only 10 pockets and you can see that there is 1 sponge per pocket, that is not necessary to actually count them. But we do want you to get a visual confirmation, say from your scrub, look, I've got them, before you put the next one on top. After you have added a package of sponges to the field, you add that to the dry erase board. At the closing count, there's nothing different that the circ and the scrub do. And as a demonstration of that, I will just show you that if we have the counts on the dry erase board that we've added 10 Raytech and we've added 20 laps, then we would expect to see here in our holders 10 Raytech, here's 10 laps, and we're still in the middle of this case, so we have 6 laps. I should have the scrub show me that on the back table there are 4 sponges. So do that now, open this, and so there are 20 laps. I have 10 and 6, I should have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a closing count activity. We've confirmed that what we have hanging, there's nothing in our ring stand, and what she has on the back table or on the field would say that this is a correct count. But this is an interim count, and this is not truly any more verifiable than what we've shown here, because there still could be sponges inside the patient as they're finishing up the operation. The most important thing to happen at the closing count is for the surgeon to do the methodical wound exam. And we've given handouts and instruction on the steps to follow in the methodical wound exam, and that should be disseminated through your surgeon champion. Now the operation is over. The surgeon, we've closed the skin, and we've got all of the sponges out of the kick buckets, and we're trying to go for the final count. And we have on our dry erase board 20 laps, 10 Raytech. We've got 2 holders here of laps and Raytech, and you'll see here that there are 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need 2 more. Do you have 2?
1, 2.
Okay. That is not a final count. The final count is only when all of the sponges have been passed off of the field. They would go into the ring stand or kick bucket, and they're placed in the holders. So this is the final count. There are 10 Raytech, 20 laps. We have 10 Raytech, 10 plus 10 laps. This is the final count, and you'll see that there are no empty pockets. Now in this particular rack setup, you can see that they have the capacity to hold 4 of these sponge holders. But if you're working in a hospital that has a single system, the final configuration may look something more like this, where you have the 2 holders in front of each other. Nevertheless, you can see very easily there are no empty pockets. And what you're really looking for, instead of counting the sponges, is that there be no empty pockets. And at the final step, which we call the show me step, what we would have happen is the circulating nurse would show the surgeon before the surgeon leaves the room, or whomever the surgeon has designated to close, 20 laps, 10 Raytech, and this is 20 laps, 10 Raytech, and we say to show them, because they're hanging here, easy to see, that that there are no empty pockets. One of the most powerful aspects of this practice is how transparent it is. And you can see if there's an empty pocket. And in this circumstance, we're missing a Raytech because there's an empty pocket where it should be in the one of the upper 2 pockets. And in those circumstances, we want you to use this incorrect count checklist, because we found in these incorrect count cases that oftentimes the team members don't know what to do. So we've put it all right here. The first thing is that the nurse or scrub person should say what type of sponge is missing. So in this instance, we're missing a Raytech. And the surgeon should repeat the wound exam. If they don't find it on the wound exam, while they're doing that, everybody should begin looking in the room. And we say that here, check the trash and look at the linens, and perhaps call other people to come and help in the search. And if none of those are successful, we go to X-ray. The X-ray instructions are even here on the checklist. Our recommendations are for the radiology technologist to come and take 2 views. That can be either 2 views initially or take 1, and if it's not seen on that, to take another view, and to call the radiologist to review those images. Because even though the surgeon can look at the images and see if there's something there and ultimately remove them, it's not safe, it's not the best practice for the surgeons to call a film negative. We want radiologists, who are the content experts in the interpretation of radiographic images, to call directly into the operating room and comment on the quality of the film, the adequacy of the image, and whether or not something is present. If it turns out that the sponge is not found, then you must record that count as incorrect and move this up the chain of command to nursing administration so that everybody knows that we have a problem. And the most other important thing to do is also to remember that when you're looking in the room, you're also looking back in the pockets of the holders, especially with Raytec, because as I said earlier, Raytec can stick together. And so you also want to make sure that within each pocket, you only have 1 sponge and not 2. And we found that that is one of the most common problems with not separating the sponges, that indeed they can stick together. So now we would say we have a correct count, no empty pockets. So the operation is over. And one of the other things that is, again, very powerful about this practice is what you do at the end of the case is you can take all of the sponges, the bloody sponges, and place them in red biohazard bags or containers for safe infectious waste disposal. And in this way, all of the sponges that were used in one case can be removed from the room so they won't confound the count for any subsequent cases.